For many years, Marta Kristen kept silent about the decisions, conflicts, and incidents that were never in the script. The black and white version was far more science fiction than it actually was. I believe there is a great deal of interest. It was imperative, in my opinion, that our show become more cartoonish. She's opening up now. Why did she almost leave before the trip even started? What did she notice that fans didn't notice? A long-forgotten tidbit adds a whole new level of complexity to the narrative. And all began in a location distant from Hollywood, eager to discover what has been lurking in the wings, from an orphanage to space. Marta Kristen's life began in a setting far different from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, in the shadow of World War II. Kristen was born Birgit Annalisa Rosenen in Oslo, Norway. Her father was a German soldier who was killed in the war, and her mother was Finnish. She was placed in an underground orphanage to escape being accepted into Hitler's Lebensborn program, a state-sponsored endeavor aimed at producing racially pure offspring, due to her parentage and the Nazi regime's racial purity theories. Her quiet tenacity would subsequently be demonstrated by these formative years, which were characterized by war and uncertainty. She was adopted by Professor Harold Soderquist, a Wayne University professor, and his wife in 1949 when she was just 4 years old. She started a new life in the U.S. after being christened Marta Kristen by her adoptive parents. Though drastic, the shift from war-torn Europe to post-war America brought opportunity and stability. Kristen later credited her family's encouragement and her adoptive father's educational background with greatly influencing her perspective. She attended Santa Monica High School after the family moved to California on her father's sabbatical, and despite being an immigrant, she swiftly adjusted and thrived in her new surroundings. Kristen nearly unintentionally fell into acting. Lolita's producer, James Harris, found her in a restaurant when she was a teenager. Naturally, that offer didn't go anywhere because her parents immediately rejected it because the role was the most contentious and she was still a juvenile. She did, however, make a big impact on Harris, who ultimately assisted her in finding an agent. Kristen quickly began getting parts in some of the most well-known TV shows of the day. Among her early credits were guest roles on The 11th Hour in the Disney movie Savage Sam, as well as an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, ironically opposite her future co-star Billy Mooney in Lost in Space. Marta Kristen's strong resume, which presented a more compelling personal tale than her cinematic credits, was in place prior to her Lost in Space audition. She was adopted into America after being born as an orphan in hiding and went on to become a successful young actress in Hollywood. It was truly remarkable. Judy Robinson appeared to mimic the young actress's adaptation, bravery, and venturing into uncharted terrain in many ways. For her to contribute a genuinely earthy perspective to her character and subsequent thoughts on fame and identity, the early redesigns, early period of displacement, and early reinvention slipped under her feet. But one casting room would leave her speechless, even as momentum grew. An impending star. Marta Kristen nearly landed a part in The Sound of Music, one of the most cherished musicals ever made, long before she became famous as Judy Robinson in Lost in Space. The movie, which starred Julie Andrews and Angela Cartwright, was released in 1965. As Bridget Von Trapp, Kristen's future Lost in Space castmate. After undergoing a screen test, Kristen appeared to be a good fit for the Von Trapp household. To her astonishment, though, she was eventually rejected for the role not because she was untalented, but rather because the producers thought she was too attractive for the clean family movie. At the time, Kristen was only 20 years old. And the label was frustrating as well as unclear. She openly admitted that she never saw herself that way in a 2021 Fox News interview. The industry's double standards, which ironically close as many doors as they open, particularly for women. In fact, there was a lot of irony in the lost chance because Kristen's co-star, Angela Cartwright, had been chosen for The Sound of Music. Kristen then played a supporting role in Lost in Space shortly after. In contrast to her current trajectory in sci-fi films, Kristen's career would have surely withered in the world of musicals had she been cast in the role. Kristen would not, however, aim to live in the realm of unmet expectations. After accepting her fate and moving on, she soon landed the job that would define her entire career. However, it permanently altered her perception of how women are viewed and assessed in the entertainment sector. An important turning point in Kristen's early Hollywood journey is her near miss with The Sound of Music. It demonstrated how, rather than being only a good quality, beauty may actually prevent actors from landing meaningful jobs. Additionally, it created a rich thread that allowed Kristen's character to deftly break free from those limitations. She left her mark on television history by wearing a space-age jumpsuit aboard the Jupiter 2, but not donning a dirndl on the Austrian slopes. The nearly non-existent role. Marta Kristen had to make a tough choice before she ever set foot on the Jupiter 2. One that might have fundamentally changed how her career unfolded. Kristen revealed in an eye-opening 2021 interview with Fox News that she didn't accept Lost in Space right away when it was initially offered to her. She referred to theater as her first love at the time, and she was seriously thinking about moving to New York to pursue a career in it. Kristen wasn't sure that a science fiction TV series was the appropriate choice for her, even if her television career was taking off, thanks to roles in Savage Sam and cameos on programs like Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She considered the allure of stage performing against the uncertain future of a network television series during her nearly 2-week hesitancy. Kristen remembered that some of her loved ones were surprised that she was even thinking of declining. Her friends and co-workers persuaded her to think again, pointing out that a prominent part like this may change her life not just for her profession, but also for her legacy in television. She ultimately made the decision to jump because she thought that getting lost in space might lead to opportunities she had never thought of. Irwin Allen, the showrunner, had already decided that Kristen would play Judy Robinson, and he had no intention of finding another candidate. Given that she knew the role would not satisfy her artistic ambitions, Kristen's decision to accept it was all the more remarkable. Despite its merit as a moniker, Judy's character development and on-screen appearance were hardly utilized in her part. As a fervent admirer of the text, Kristen did wish it had more substance, something that would demonstrate her love-hate connection with literature and Shakespeare. But she started to value what the show had to offer and discovered significance in all of its bigger themes. Looking back, Kristen has never felt bad about her decision. She might have been drawn away from a career in theater by Lost in Space, but it also provided her something unexpected. A devoted following, enduring friendships, and a permanent position in popular culture. Kristen now views that decision as a turning point rather than a distraction. Now, the job she would treasure was the unsure step she took towards sci-fi television. Nearly 60 years later, this role continues to connect her with audiences of all ages. Quiet on the set. Marta Kristen has later disclosed that, despite her calm and elegance in the part of Judy Robinson on Lost in Space, she experienced creative frustration when portraying the oldest of the Robinson daughters. Despite being a member of the core family, Kristen revealed in her 2021 interview with Fox News that her character was frequently marginalized in favor of the robot and Dr. Smith, who were becoming more and more important. Judy could have been a part of deeper, more emotionally charged stories, but as time went on, the show's plot shifted more toward campy sci-fi antics and comedic relief. Kristen mentioned a particular desire for Judy's persona to mirror her own interests in theater and academia. She told Fox that she hoped Judy had been written with more nuance and intellect because she had grown up reading and quoting Shakespeare, especially in works like Macbeth. According to her, Judy could have been shown as more than a love interest or a helpful daughter. Kristen envisioned a more emotionally complex, dramatic, and intellectually curious version of the character who added her own voice to the family dynamic and possibly even questioned the difficulties they experienced in the future. The friendship between Judy and Major Don West, Mark Goddard, was one of the ones that Kristen thought was lacking. Despite being hinted at, romance never really took center stage in the story. Kristen thought the program might have benefited greatly from this relationship, especially in the socially conscious 1960s. A series that had already struggled with survival in space and family cohesion might have gained additional layers of meaning if Judy and Don's relationship had been written better. It could have reflected shifting gender roles, young romantic spirits in isolation, or a struggle between personal freedom and responsibility. Notwithstanding these lost chances, Kristen looks back on her experience with gratitude and candor. The veracity of her remarks demonstrates that, while Lost in Space was innovative in many respects, it was also very much a product of its day, especially in terms of how few female characters it included. She is not resentful when she talks about these past times. Instead, it examines the storytelling conventions of the time. She still highlights what may have been in her reflections, presenting fresh angles on how both authors and fans could perceive an otherwise cherished classic as an unfinished portrayal of its character's potential. Behind the smiles, Marta Kristen remembers that life behind the scenes was full of real passion, mentorship, and sometimes tension, even if Lost in Space had plenty of campy, lighthearted fun on screen. During her interview with Fox News in 2021, Kristen characterized the cast as more than just colleagues. A second family was formed between them. Kristen stressed that the relationships they forged were enduring and profoundly significant, despite the typical highs and lows that accompany tight collaboration on a long-running program. We had our disagreements, like any family, she said, but there was love, respect, and laughter that carried us through. Kristen spoke fondly of the older cast members who became mentors to her during filming. Guy Williams, who played her on-screen father, Professor John Robinson, was a classically trained actor and a former music teacher. She remembered how classical music constantly played from his dressing room, creating a calming presence on set. June Lockhart, who portrayed Maureen Robinson, taught Kristen how to play Scrabble and was described as an extraordinary woman with a rich professional background. Jonathan Harris, who portrayed the mischievous Dr. Smith, left a particularly strong impression. He taught Kristen the value of professionalism. Show up on time, know your lines, and always respect the crew. Kristen was in particular close contact with Bill Mumy, the young Will Robinson, his co-star. She said she was the one who first got him into Dylan, and the two were often found singing Dylan together between sets. Angela Cartwright, who played Penny Robinson, is a very dear friend who Kristen called one of the sweetest people in the cast. She said her relationship with Mark Goddard Major Don West was filled with laughter. He could crack her up until she couldn't breathe. This humorous camaraderie carried over into real life, from which audiences drew the chemistry they saw on the screen. For Kristen, one of her deepest and most cherished reflections was upon meeting Jonathan Harris for the last time before he died in 2002. Harris embraced Kristen after she had done a commercial with him, telling her how lovely she was. This touched her heart. The friendship continued with Harris's widow, Gertrude, whom Kristen later grew fond of, adopting the dog Gertrude had after she passed. These stories are testimony to the emotional depth that lies beneath those polished TV smiles, creating a cast that genuinely cared for each other. For Kristen, Lost in Space's true legacy, however, was not really in the space adventures, but rather in the lasting human bonds made around those adventures. But just as the bonds deepened, something unexpected shattered the rhythm. Sudden silence. Marta Kristen still vividly remembers the moment Lost in Space came to an unexpected halt. She was at home when the call came in, just a routine afternoon turned life-altering with a few short words. The show had been cancelled. There was no formal farewell, no final episode to wrap up the Robinsons' journey, and no warning signs that the end was near. Kristen was left speechless. For a series that had developed a strong fan base and was doing well in the ratings, the sudden cancellation was not only surprising, but emotionally jarring for the cast. In the aftermath, no one could quite figure out why Lost in Space had been pulled. It wasn't until much later that Kristen and the rest of the cast discovered the underlying issue, a conflict between series creator Owen Allen and CBS. According to Kristen, the network had been demanding more scripts than Allen could deliver, reportedly asking for 6 at a time. Allen, who was juggling multiple projects, wasn't able to meet the network's demands. Rather than compromise or fight for the series, he let it go. The decision was largely a logistical one, but it cut short what many believed still had creative life and audience appeal. Another thing that added to the confusion was that Lost in Space continued to perform well with viewers, even generating a loyal following of younger fans. Kristen noted that imaginative stories and a realization of strong themes around family and survival made it popular among children and parents alike. The production itself also invested massively in visual effects and making elaborate sets, making this quite an expensive business, most likely yet another reason for CBS's pulling the plug. But even that sudden termination made it feel mediocre to the cast, as they had become quite close after all the investment into their own characters. Even after the disappointment passed, would later reflect on the legacy of the show with a certain gratitude. Although she would have liked to have a proper send-off, she was proud of what they produced together. She was particularly moved by the fact that younger generations now continue to discover Lost in Space well past the time it aired. It had sent the message home that while there was no closure with the cancellation of the show, the quality remained. And that was comforting to Kristen. It still surprises me, she recalled, that people even today, with all the modern gimmicks, can remember our simple little show. A sense of belonging, though Lost in Space, came to an unexpected end. Its influence on Marta Kristen's life proved to be lasting and deeply personal. In her 2021 interview with Fox News, Kristen spoke with heartfelt honesty about what the series gave her beyond fame, a true sense of belonging. For a woman who had started life in an orphanage in Norway, the experience of joining a tight-knit cast and working closely for 3 seasons created something more profound than a job. It created a family. The ensemble nature of the show and the long hours on set fostered a spirit of collaboration and emotional closeness that Kristen would treasure for decades. Kristen described learning valuable lessons from her fellow cast members, particularly about professionalism, respect, and dedication. Jonathan Harris, who played Dr. Smith, stood out as someone who taught her the importance of showing up on time, knowing your lines, and honoring the work of everyone on set, from actors to crew. These lessons helped her develop a strong work ethic and a deeper appreciation for the collaborative nature of television. The cast, while occasionally having disagreements, operated with mutual respect and affection. And this environment helped Kristen grow not just as an actress, but as a person. Kristen forged relationships on the set of the show that endured even after it had long left the air. She remained close friends with some co-stars, including Bill Mooney and Angela Cartwright, as the three would eventually collaborate decades later on the book Lost and Found in Space 2. Kristen also had a lifelong friendship with Gertrude, Jonathan Harris's widow, and adopted her dog after Gertrude died, creating an emotionally charged connection that spoke to how much Lost in Space had entered into her personal life. This personal continuity offered her relationships through granite phases of her career and life. In the end, Kristen would say that Lost in Space gave her more than career recognition. It gave her a space to be seen, valued, and connected. The cameras gave her visibility, but also a home away from home, while she was still giving herself a foothold in Hollywood. I gained a sense of an ensemble, she told Fox, a sense of what it's like to work together. For Marta Kristen, the true legacy of the show was not its fame, but the friends she made and the feeling of family that stayed with her long after the cameras stopped rolling. A reunion through time and memory. Decades after Lost in Space ended, Marta Kristen reunited with her longtime co-stars Bill Mooney and Angela Cartwright for a special project that reignited memories and brought their shared history to life. Together, they published Lost and Found in Space 2 Blast Off into the Expanded Edition, a richly illustrated memoir that featured nearly 1,000 behind-the-scenes photographs, including more than 600 never-before-seen images. The book wasn't just a nostalgic look back. It was a personal and emotional journey through their years on set, one that unearthed long-forgotten stories and emotions for Kristen. Many of the photos had been recently discovered and hand-selected by Kristen, Mooney, and Cartwright themselves, making the book deeply personal and unique. For Kristen, flipping through the images was like opening a time capsule. She recalled moments of laughter, long filming days, and the familial bonds that developed among the cast. Each photograph served as a reminder, not just of her younger self, but of the people who helped shape her life, both professionally and personally. Some images even captured candid, intimate moments between scenes, showcasing a cast that truly felt like a team. Monsters and Friends, featuring the Kevin Burns collection in Heritage Auctions, was a rare in-costume reunion in 2021 when the book was released. Kristen, Mooney, and Cartwright obliged once again to don their iconic characters to promote the auction and book and relive the magic and passion among a fan base that had never ceased loving the show. It is the emotional weightiness of donning that character after many, many years that struck Kristen about how enduringly Lost in Space had influenced its audience, in fact, on her own life. For her, this book was not merely an autobiography, but an ode to memory, friendship, and strength. It was a revisit to times that were greatly positive. And that had an impact on her life, while incorporating that experience into the lives of fans, both new and old. Doing so would bring healing and pride to reaffirm that the relationships forged in a fictitious world of a spaceship were real, lasting, and truly human. Rediscovering those images and stories, Marta Kristen found herself not just coming back to the past, but also to understanding what the journey that started so many years ago meant. While looking back at the history of the show and its fan culture is a very important route to take, such dialectical investigation of a cult classic opens a rare view into the geo-emotional construction of such a cult classic. In the words of pop cultural historian Jennifer Cation Armstrong, when actors open their archives, they're not just sharing memorabilia, they're inviting fans into a shared memory. By curating these images themselves, and her co-stars created a bridge between their private reflections and the public's nostalgia, turning the book into a communal experience rather than merely a retrospective. The legacy that surprised her. For Marta Kristen, one of the most unexpected gifts of her career has been witnessing the enduring appeal of Lost in Space. More than 5 decades after the show first aired, Kristen shared in her 2021 Fox News interview that she continues to be amazed by how many young people are discovering and embracing the series. In an era dominated by CGI-heavy blockbusters and fast-paced storytelling, the simplicity and heart of Lost in Space still resonate. By today's standards, it looks very simple, Kristen admitted, but people connect with it. And that brings me great joy. Kristen believes the show's staying power lies in its universal themes: family, survival, teamwork, and hope. Even though Lost in Space featured far-fetched alien encounters and comical sci-fi tropes, its emotional core was grounded in something deeply human: the strength of familial bonds in the face of adversity. It's this emotional honesty, she feels, that transcends generations. Younger viewers, despite being raised on more sophisticated effects and storytelling techniques, still find something comforting and inspiring in the show's message. In fact, that rekindled enthusiasm in the series gives credence to the nostalgia factor, especially for parents or grandparents who introduced children to Lost in Space. Kristen often enjoys hearing from fans who, as children, were addicted to the show and are now opening the experience, yet again, multi-generationally through family viewing. Memories, not just entertainment, can join people across time. That kind of heritage means more to her than mere celebrity. It is a reminder that tales, when told with honesty and imagination, never really disappear. Standing witness to the way Lost in Space remains alive has been both humbling and comforting to Kristen. What started as the defining role in her career has become a real bridge across eras, cultures, and generations. Today, she understands that the show was not just another program on 1960s television. It was a cultural touchstone that continues to nurture imagination, inspire hope, and keep the notion that love and unity can light the way, even in the darkest corners of space. For Kristen, it's a gentle, eternal wellspring of reward that Judy Robinson still lives in the hearts of new fans. It's one she never could have envisioned when she first stepped onto the Jupiter 2. Another angle from which to view Lost in Space's survival is not only nostalgia, but also an insatiable desire for stories grounded in hope, very rare in the often cynical worlds of today's media. The belief in togetherness, resoluteness in overcoming problems, and family strength becomes so countercultural in a time when dystopia occupies the greatest share of parading across screens. According to media scholar Amanda Lotz, audiences often return to the show that reassures them about their values, especially in times of insecurity. Kristen's continued engagement of fans with the revelation by many of rediscovered admiration during hard times further suggests that Lost in Space may be much more than retro entertainment. It's turning into a soft landing pad, a reminder that even fictional futures can carry very real hope. Just as the show left a mark on its audience, it left something lasting within Kristen too. Something far more personal, a final reflection. Now in her 80s, Marta Kristen looks back on her time as Judy Robinson with a profound sense of gratitude rather than regret. In her 2021 interview with Fox News, reflected on how Lost in Space not only gave her a career, but helped shape her identity in ways she didn't fully realize at the time. Though her role was often overshadowed by the antics of Dr. Smith and the popularity of the robot, Kristen understands now that even a quieter character can have a lasting impact. Judy Robinson might not have been front and center in every episode, but Kristen's portrayal brought grace, sincerity, and heart to the role. Kristen has come to value the emotional connections formed with fans as one of the show's most unexpected gifts. Over the decades, countless viewers have approached her at conventions and public appearances, sharing how the show shaped their childhoods or brought their families together. That enduring affection from audiences, many of whom now span 3 generations, has given Kristen a deep appreciation for the role she played in television history. Even when the scripts didn't give Judy Robinson much to do, Kristen's presence contributed to the show's warmth and balance, anchoring the Robinson family with her quiet strength. From the very beginning, for Kristen, playing Judy was never simply acting, but rather participating in something much bigger than herself. She credits Lost in Space with teaching her the great lessons of teamwork, endurance, and humility. She learned many lessons from how the ensemble nature of the production emphasized collaboration. And after long hours of shooting, she was left with a balanced perspective on fame and professionalism. This experience especially taught her that small work, if played truthfully and lovingly, can bear great meaning. In a sense, Lost in Space was not quite a project for Kristen, but a whole chapter in her life. It brought her everlasting friendships and memorable experiences in a lineage of culture that is still evolving. To Kristen, the measure of her worthwhile contribution to that set recalls not screen time, but emotional impact. "It was a wonderful show to do," said Fox, which itself speaks volumes about the unpretentious dignity in which Kristen carries her legacy. In a nutshell, Judy Robinson traveled through space, while Marta Kristen discovered a greater journey of purpose, belonging, and timeless connection. Beyond emotional ties and lessons attained, Kristen's journey highlights a less individual, broader truth regarding the women on television in the mid-20th century, particularly in science fiction. While female characters were primarily put in supporting roles or were confined to domestic tropes in her era, Judy Robinson was rather atypical in being part of a pioneering family traveling through space. While the role was not as psychologically or thematically deep as Kristen had wished, Judy remained a quietly dignified presence that undermined the stereotypes in persistent ways. As the television historian Susan J. Douglas put it, even passive roles when played with intelligence and care can subtly shift the cultural lens. Thus, through her own relatively diminutive efforts, Kristen, in portraying Judy, not only stirred the audience's emotions but also slanted the depiction of women a little in the media. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Marta Kristen's journey on Lost in Space, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more classic TV stories, and drop a comment below. What surprised you most about her experience? And don't go far. Click the next video on your screen for more behind-the-scenes moments from the stars you grew up with. See you there.